following pre-recorded program is sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. Welcome to About Money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your host, Mike Adams, is a registered investment advisor and works with investment portfolios exceeding over $100,000 in net worth and has a proven track record of managing long-term investments, surpassing the markets in the long term. The information shared on the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's Mike.
And it is Saturday, and we're going to be talking about money. We're going to be talking about China today. I have a presentation that is coming due. It's going to be coming up actually today, and I will be delivering that presentation. So you actually get to hear the presentation before I actually make it. This gets to be a practice session for me to go through the first part of the presentation, because the total presentation is going to be an hour and a half or so. So we will do it this week, and we'll finish it next week, so you get the full presentation, but you get to hear what I'm going to say. And it's about China. You know, how did it happen? How did they grow from a $70 billion economy to $13 trillion in 50 years? How did they grow to be the second largest economy in the world? How did they become our biggest competitor? And where are things going? You know, they withdrew Didi from the IPO in America. Why? What's happened with Chinese public companies? What's going on? Why is it going down? And what's the impact? And then I want to compare America and China. Who's the biggest competitor? Who wins? China's very public about replacing America as the world leader. Will they? Maybe not. I'm going to give you my thoughts as to why I don't think that's going to happen. But let's start. Let's start with, how did they get to where they are today? Because in 1970, their GDP was $92 billion. At a time when the United States was a little over $1 trillion, we were over 10 times what they were. But in 2021, their economy is going to be approximately $13 trillion. Ours is just $22 trillion. We have grown in those 51 years, we've grown 21-fold. They grew 181-fold. 181 times, 6 times faster than we did in America. So how did that happen? They copied. It was not a unique concept. They copied. You're probably not surprised about that. Not at all. We have to look back to France, 1661, and what I call the legend of Jean-Baptiste Colbert. Louis XIV ascends to the throne in 1661, and France is close to bankruptcy. They fought 3 major wars, 2 minor wars. They have a backward economy. Their industry is mostly small crafts. And they need money. They're not globally competitive. And in those days, we didn't have paper money. It was either gold or silver. And France had no mines. So they had need for cash. And so Louis XIV, Louis XIV as I call him, Louis XIV brings in Jean-Baptiste Colbert in 1665. And his focus as the Minister of Finance, as the Treasury Secretary, was to modernize the French economy. That was his mission. He wanted to build glass and textile industries. He wanted to poach craftsmen and entrepreneurs from various countries, and they offered a royal privilege. No taxes. They would finance the factories. They would guarantee the sales. And that was what Jean-Baptiste Colbert set about to do. Send spies to England and around the world to find craftsmen and skilled entrepreneurs. That was him, Jean-Baptiste Colbert. And they went to England, for example, and bought the first steam engine from the English. They brought it back to France, and they reverse engineered to make their own steam engine. But once they had it, that information, they had to protect it. They had to make sure that it was French technology. And so what they did is once they had the craftsmen in France, they would keep them in France. If they left France, they could be executed. If they were caught leaving, they would end up rowing on one of the King's galley ships. And over 15,000 small entrepreneurs were executed just because they imported cotton cloth from outside of France. Jean-Baptiste Colbert wanted to make sure that France manufactured its own products, they didn't import, and they exported, because that's what he wanted to do to make the economy run. He wanted to build a trade surplus to finance the economy. He wanted to build factories, over 1,000 people. That was something new in France. They paid them minimum wages. They put them into dormitories. They wanted the women to marry young, to create more workers. They wanted them to work 14 to 16 hours a day. And Colbert got into a dispute with the Roman Catholic Church because he said there were too many holidays. The workers worked every single day except for holidays. And Colbert wanted the French government to have fewer holidays. That's where they were focused. Well, as Colbert started, they had a large rural population, high unemployment, but Colbert wanted to fix that. He wanted to bring the workers into factories, and he wanted women to marry under 20 to populate the factories. That was Colbert. But it wasn't just wasn't manufacturing. The Dutch dominated international trade, and Colbert wanted to build a merchant navy. He wanted to send ships with French goods, and so they charged high fees for foreign vessels and low fees for French vessels, and he restricted competitive imports. He wanted to promote high quality and would hire some of the top, or he hired a quality control team to monitor the products that are produced. Some of those products, some of those factories still exist today. He was ruthless. He was able, and he had full control of the finances of France. And what he did is he built a trade surplus that funded the economy. You know, when you look at some of the companies today, they're recognized as some of the finest quality in the world, luxury products, silk, tapestries, fine glass, Gobelin tapestry, Saint-Gobain glassmaker. He was hated, however, in France and outside of France. But he truly launched France on a path to large-scale industrialization. Call that mercantilism, and that was the model for China. That is what they copied. China, the most populous country in the world, did many things the same way that Colbert did it in France. You have the Communist Party that has broad authority. They rule the land. They control the banks. They have the infrastructure. And they control foreign policy. They control the military as well. Whatever is of major importance, the French Communist Party has control of it. And by owning the banks, they decide who gets the money and who doesn't. And what they've done is they've adopted some capitalistic practices without giving up control. But they can decide. They can make the decisions on who gets the money and who doesn't. And they have a long-term development plan. They're focused on expanding China into the world. That is their stated purpose, and that's what they are doing. That has been their purpose for 50 years. And it's working. They control the key industries. They control the key domestic policies. They can promote exports, and create trade surpluses. Most of the products that are exported, almost all the products that are exported, were technology that was brought in from somewhere else. And they're building a domestic base capable of innovation. We're going to talk about that even in more detail. They fund the large companies in the industries which they really want to control. They control even public companies. How does all this work? Stay with me. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be back right after this commercial break.
About Money with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on Adams Financial Concepts. About Money with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
So I've been talking about China. How did they grow from a $90 billion country to 13 trillion? How did they grow 6 times faster than the United States? And what does that mean today? When they say they want to replace America as the world leader, what does that mean? How are they going about that? We're going to get to all that today, or most of it today, and we're going to finish next week. This is something that really will be looking forward for investments and where we go. So we have to be aware of it. As I mentioned, Louis XIV comes to power. He brings in Jean-Baptiste Colbert. Colbert begins immediately to revive France, to make it from a backward country into a leading economic power. And he did that by bringing in outside entrepreneurs and forcing them to stay in France. He built factories. He gave royal privilege, gave the financing to build the factories, built the dormitories for the people, gave them a guarantee sale, gave them no taxes, put all the people to work. That's what Colbert was, hated. But he gave low-cost labor, modern infrastructure, and that's what China started with. Low-cost labor, modern infrastructure, and they convinced companies to move to China. 70% of exports from China come from relocated plants. One example, I have to give you an example of one of those, Takeo. Boeing is a small partner. Boeing owns 15%. But where Takeo now exists, that was a large duck pond. You can imagine it. Just kind of a marsh with a lot of ducks flying in and out, some duck hunting going on there. But the Chinese government came in and said, what we want to do is we want to build a conversion factory. We want to begin to convert primarily 747 Boeing planes from passenger configuration to freighter. Now, what goes on when passenger planes are sold by Boeing or by Airbus? After about 15 years, the maintenance has increased, the wear has increased, they're less fuel efficient. And so what happens to a lot of those planes? The hulls are taken and they're converted to freighters. They fill in the windows, do the scan on the outside of the plane, removing the windows. They put in cargo doors. They rip out the interior. They stick in conveyor belts and things to stack in pallets. And they load the planes. They make them into freighters. DHL, Federal Express, the different freighters in the world. Those are mostly converted aircraft. 747s, 757s, a few 737s. Those are converted into freighters. Air freight travels on those all over the world. It was Boeing technology, Boeing certification, and that's what they did. Boeing's a 15% partner. So is a couple of Japanese airlines, some Chinese airlines. That facility began to fill in, and they built one or two hangars, and they continued to add hangars. They went up to 15,000 workers working on that duck pond. They built dormitories. Those people work long hours, and they work for cheap. That was takeoff. That's how you convert, and that's what the government wanted, because the aerospace business is a huge economic business, and that's what they built. They took the technology from Boeing, they used Boeing as a partner, and then they became a major competitor of Boeing. That's what we're seeing. They're not the only ones. Think about on the site of Foxconn, 100,000 workers making Apple products, most of which are sent overseas. There's an additional 300,000 workers that work in and out of Foxconn and around that, and they built dormitories. Those are workers that work for Hewlett-Packard and also Apple and some of the other manufacturers, high-tech manufacturers. And they're bringing in the latest technology, just like Colbert did. High-speed trains, they do joint ventures with Japanese and the Dutch on their high-speed train. And what did they do? China has been accused of stealing the technology, because what China did is they made a few improvements and then they claimed that it was theirs. And now they compete with those very joint venture partners, the Japanese and the Dutch. That's what China did. So that's how they compete. That's how they build. That's how they went from 92 billion to 13 trillion. That's how they got to where they are today. They had a model, and they copied that model, and they copied it very well. So what happened? How did it end in France? What happened? You know what happened? The revolution came, and a lot of people lost their heads. Literally lost their heads. And it went from a king who ruled to an emperor. France had become, by the time the aristocracy fell and it became a pseudo-democracy, they had become an economic power. At the time, the largest in the Western world. And while the French Revolution ended the line of kings, it brought to power Napoleon Bonaparte, and he set out to use the economic power to build the French Empire. And he did that. He did that in the 1800s. This is what the French Empire looked like. If you can imagine the map of Europe with Spain, with Italy, with some of the Balkan areas, all the way to Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Hungary, all the way into Russia, Poland. All of that fell under Napoleon and the French Empire. And how was he able to finance that? Thanks to Jean-Baptiste Colbert under Louis the 14th, Louis XIV. They had the economic power to do that. That's exactly what they did. And they built that. So what does China want to do? China learned their lesson from France. They copied France. And so Xi Jinping comes to power in modern China. And in September 2017, 5 years ago, and they do a national convocation every 5 years where they bring the Communist Party together. And in 2017, they did what was called Made in China 2025. The Economist at the time called him the world's most powerful man. And his message was to pursue the dream of rejuvenation, to make China the number one country in the world. And part of that was the Made in China, to dominate the world in high-tech industries, in medical devices, in computers, in telecommunications, in electric vehicles, in advanced and basic materials, in mobile devices, in agricultural machinery, in robotics. And the whole focus was to replace America as the world leader. And now comes a second aspect to that. The Belt and Road Initiative. The Silk Road. When you go back and look at the Silk Road a few centuries ago, it wasn't one road from China to the Mediterranean Sea, but it covered almost all of South Asia. Up far as north, it went through Kazakhstan and Mongolia. Down south, it went through the southern part of China, down through India, through Iran, through Iraq, through Arabia, and into Africa, through Turkey, and into the Mediterranean area. And it was the trading that was taking place. They were using that Silk Road to create economic power. They were selling things from China, silk, and whatever, to bring in spices, to bring in products from the West. That was what they're doing. And China again, with the Belt and Road Initiative, the focus is once again to rebuild not just one road from China to the Mediterranean Sea, but to build a road that's by the sea, to control the sea, at the belt, to control the land. Xi Jinping called it the project of the century. And it should be. When you look at it, if you can look at a map, you can see it stretching all the way to the Pacific. That was their focus. They're committing trillions of dollars on infrastructure. They're willing to finance roads and railroads and ports and power stations. They're pouring money into countries like Azerbaijan, Georgia. And we're going to come back and talk about this because this is what China is doing and has been doing. It's all a focus to replace America as the world leader, as the number one economic and military leader of the world. How does this apply economically? How does it apply militarily? We're going to come back and talk about that. And what are they doing and what's happening and what direction they're going. We're going to talk about why I believe that they're not going to succeed in what they're doing. But they are going to be a competitor. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this commercial break to talk more about it.
About Money with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on Adams Financial Concepts. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So, talking about China, this program, talking about how they went from 92 billion to 13 trillion. But once they got there, once they've gotten there, what are they doing? I talked about how they had a model to copy in France, and that gave them the model to grow their economy, to become an economic power. But just as France did once, They built their economic power just as Napoleon wanted to conquer the world and build a French empire, and he did do that. So the Chinese appear to be headed that way as well. They started to dominate technology with Made in China 2025. And we've got more to talk about as we talk about that. But the Belt and Road Initiative is to rebuild the Silk Road, but not just the Silk Road. They want the Silk Road on ice. They want to control the Arctic Ocean. They want the Pacific Silk Road to control the Pacific Ocean. They want the digital Silk Road to control cyberspace. They want all roads leading to Beijing. And they want to gain control of Europe through the Middle East and into Africa. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, they're committing trillions of dollars on infrastructure. They're financing roads and railroads and ports and power stations. They're pouring money into countries like Azerbaijan, Georgia, Armenia, creating connections to the rest of the world. Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, strengthening them economically to help defend the China-Western border and to keep them from becoming hotbeds of Islamic terrorism. Trillions of dollars being spent. You know, you almost have to believe that they understand the French Empire was built on military, but they can buy their way and own and make some of these countries vassal states by owning the roads, the railroads, the ports, and the power stations, and the airports. They can control those countries. And it worries some of the rest of the world. It's been a real worry because those countries cannot question human rights. Those countries are being financed, but they're doing it not through government grants. They don't use foreign aid. They make loans. They require the use of Chinese labor. And so those countries pile up tons of debts that they owe to Chinese companies that are owned or controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. Gives China a tremendous strategic hold. In Pakistan, the politicians took credit for Chinese investment, one of the most important countries in that whole area, and their debt, they went to the IMF for a bailout. Think about Sri Lanka. The second largest port was Hambantota. Hambantota needed to be refurbished. And so the Chinese government, through Chinese companies, loaned the money to Sri Lanka. And Sri Lanka had this significant debt owed to China or to Chinese companies. And when Sri Lanka defaulted on those bonds and that debt, the Chinese companies repossessed the port. China now owns the port of Hambantota in Sri Lanka. And a quarter of the Chinese Navy is now anchored in Sri Lanka. It's a complete takeover of what's going on and how that works. I want to divert just a little bit and come back to the Made in China 2025, because that is the focus on how they're going to dominate those industries. And if you look at what's happened, China had very little intellectual property happening in 2010. As I mentioned before, one of the things that Colbert did is he went out and recruited entrepreneurs and tradespeople to come in and build the intellectual property. They went out, they stole the steam engine or re-engineered the steam engine from England. China in 2010 had granted around 30,000 patents. If you compare that, in 2010, the U.S. Patent Office issued 241,000 patents. If you look at 2020, the initiative was Chinese patents. They had issued 2.3 million patents. In the United States, we issued 350,000. So China's issued, they've obtained patents on 8 times as many products as the U.S. And there's a reason for that. There was a reorganization of intellectual property courts, but also with intellectual property. The Chinese government wanted to incentivize Chinese nationals to do innovative work. And so there's rewards. There's a national award. If you're awarded a patent, you could receive up to $150,000 or more for financing whatever you patent. Not only that, in the province, like the state, there's up to $10,000 in a number of provinces. And in addition to that, the cities will also do some of that financing. So you have, in America, if you want to do a patent, you go to a patent attorney, you pay the patent attorney, you can pay $250,000, $300,000, $400,000 to get a patent issued. In China, 85% of the cost can be deferred, and and that's in the process of applying for the patent. If it gets approved, you get a significant reward. Over $150,000 can come to you, 10 from the national government, 10,000 from the state government, and depends upon the city awards too. So there's a very significant incentive to see patents go on. But also, the Chinese government reorganized the courts. The Chinese government came along and realized that many of the courts were, in fact, the judges for the patent courts were political appointees, oftentimes not even having a college degree, oftentimes not having any background in technology or patent or intellectual property at all. It was unusual to find somebody that had a college education in the courts. But in 2017, with the launch of Made in China 2025, the Chinese government, the Communist government, realized they had to do something with the courts to protect their intellectual property, which protects the U.S. intellectual property as well. But they now are generating 2 million patents. Maybe it wasn't as much in 2017, but over 1 million patents coming through for Chinese intellectual property. They had to protect their own intellectual property. And so they removed those old judges. They added new judges. They brought in college-educated, well-educated judges to oversee the intellectual property courts. So now they have a system of intellectual property protecting their own, but also protecting outside foreign interests, and a huge number of patents being filed. They're serious about Made in China 2025. They're serious about these areas and controlling these areas, controlling and making these areas to medical, computers, telecommunications, electric vehicles, advanced and basic materials, mobile devices, agricultural machinery, robotics. They want to replace America as the world leader, and you can see what they're doing now as you listen to this program. They have set up to incentivize and develop innovation, and they've got innovation going on, millions of patents, 8 times the number of patents that are granted in China as are granted to the U.S. That's a significant difference. So that's the setting we come to today. Well, there's some things that have been going on that bring us today and what's going on with the companies that are actually formed using that intellectual property. And that's a whole different story. That's one we're going to cover as we come back from this commercial break that we're coming to. We're going to begin to address what exactly it is that's happening today and what's happening today, how that's going to impact things going forward. Is it really going to give them a leg up on competing with America? Or is it going to put them at a disadvantage? That's the end of the program. Those are my comments at the very end. But what's going on today is having a very significant impact. You'll see that. That's coming in the next section, so don't go away. We've got one more segment to talk about in this program. It's an important segment because we're talking about what's happening today. Don't go away. I'll be right back after this commercial break. So much to do.
About Money with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on Adams Financial Concepts. About Money with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
So in 2014, year in preceding the Made in China 2025, the Chinese communists became aware, really aware, of what was happening with cyberspace. And they formed in 2014 the Cyberspace Administration of China. Now, a lot of it was to make things consistent with Chinese culture, to regulate, to control, and to control cyberspace at the same time. But there was an incident in 2014 that really raised a significant concern, and that was Edward Snowden. Snowden had been working for the CIA. You'll probably remember the story. He'd been working for the CIA, and he downloaded top secret information. He downloaded it to a disk or to a thumb drive, and he walked away from it. And China realized with Snowden, they had to do something to control their national security and the potential that it could be easily stolen by one single person. And so they formed the Cyberspace Administration of China. And they set it up with departments. The Department of Internet Security Emergency Command Center. They set it up with the Agency Service Center and with the Illegal and Unhealthy Information Reporting Center. Sounds like quite a title, huh? The Illegal and Unhealthy Information Reporting Center. And to control the cybersecurity in the cyberspace in the Illegal and Unhealthy Information Reporting Center, they brought in a person, Liu Wei. Until 2016, Liu Wei had been head of the Beijing Propaganda Department. Under Liu Wei, under the Beijing Propaganda Department, he had 60,000 workers on the payroll. He had 2 million who were not physically on the payroll, but who worked for the Beijing Propaganda Department. All the websites, without exception, fell under his review. And they had to use standard official and authoritative media reports with regards to the detention of troublemaking lawyers by the relevant departments. Every one of the websites fell under that. All of it to be controlled. They were concerned about controlling that. And they set up censorship. There were comments that were not allowed on websites. Those comments could not harm national security. They could not harm China's honor or interest. They couldn't damage China's religious policies. They couldn't spread rumors. They couldn't disturb the public order. And intentionally, they couldn't use character combinations to avoid censorship. Now, Chinese is written in characters, so they couldn't replace words or hyphenate words or do something like that to avoid censorship. All of that was part of what they did in terms of censorship. Not only that, data, the new oil of the new century, also fell under their ray. And they put in policies which were put in place in June of 2021. And the dates begin to sound familiar with what's going on and what you're aware of. They put in policies to control social media, to control e-commerce, to control lending, and other business. And they also formed, beyond what Wu Wei was doing, they set up the China Internet Investment Fund under the Cyberspace Administration of China. Set up 5 years ago, and the idea was that the China Internet Investment Fund would get 1% of ownership in every internet or internet-related company. It would be at a discounted rate. And there's 130,000 private and joint venture companies. Private companies with the internet had grown from 14% of the private companies to 33% by 2015. But the China Internet Investment Fund gave them the right to appoint board members. Every one of these companies has 3 board members. They have the right to appoint 1 out of 3 board members. And the main concern of the board member was not that the company made money, not that the company was to avoid losing money, but the function of that board member, their main concern was failing to control the companies that run counter to party ideology. Losing money wasn't their major concern. Now, they wanted to make sure that those companies ran in alignment with Communist Party ideology. Think of how this might apply in America. Think of the U.S. government coming along and saying, for every internet company, we want 1 board member, and you can only have a total of 3. 3 board members on Amazon, 3 board members on Google. And those board members are going to make sure that those companies run along with the American philosophy. Whatever that might be, that's what it has to be. And you have to adhere to it. If you lose money, it's not a major concern, but we want to control what you do. And we want to control the information you get. If you get data, we want to be able to share that. If you get data and information on people, we want to be able to share that. We want to control that. And we want it to fall under national security. Consider, going back to China, consider the appointment of the board member to ByteDance. ByteDance owns TikTok. In the news about competing with Facebook. Facebook saying TikTok is competing with them, and that's part of the reason why their earnings aren't good. So who was the board member that was appointed? Wu Xingang. He was appointed. He had no business background. He came out of the communist propaganda thing. The founder of ByteDance, Shang Qing, is the founder. He's forced to step down 1 month later and replaced by Yang Rubo, and I may get the names wrong. That was the focus. That's what's going on in China. That gives you some information on why Didi was withdrawn as an IPO, why these companies are being so controlled. So where does it go? Where's the future of competition? China wants to replace America as the world's leader, commercially and militarily. We talked about the Belt and Road. That's their focus on military. This coming week, we're going to talk about the future of competition, the future of what China wants to do, and how China wants to play the game to dominate the world economically and militarily. That's coming up. You got to know where we are today. What is the future going to be like? Who's going to win? I think America will win. But do you hear why? Got to come back and join me next week. And until then, have a very good weekend and week. This is Mike Adams of Adams Financial Concepts.
Listening to About Money with Mike Adams, a registered investment advisor. If you'd like more information about what you heard today, or about Mike's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you'd like Mike to evaluate your own portfolio, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The information shared in the preceding program was for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. Join us again next Saturday at noon for more About Money with Mike Adams, here on AM 1590. The Answer. The preceding program was sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts.